She said I wasn't ambitious enough. Then I caught her with my boss. So I made a move that cost him everything. I never thought I'd be writing this story, but here we are. 3 months ago, my life was completely different, and now I'm sitting in an office that used to belong to someone else, wondering how everything changed so fast. Let me start from the beginning. I've been married for 6 years, and for the past 2, my wife kept telling me I wasn't driven enough. Every dinner conversation turned into a lecture about how I was too comfortable, too satisfied with mediocrity. She'd roll her eyes when I'd come home from work happy about a normal day, like being content was some kind of disease. The comments started small, little jokes about how I'd never be a millionaire, how I was fine being a small fish in a big pond. But they got sharper over time. I worked in corporate finance for a decent-sized company downtown. Nothing glamorous, but the pay was good, the hours were reasonable, and I genuinely enjoyed the work. I'd been there for 4 years, steadily climbing the ladder at my own pace. My boss was this guy who seemed to have everything: corner office, expensive suits, always talking about his latest vacation or new car. Everyone respected him, and honestly, I did too. He had this charm that made you want to impress him, you know? My wife seemed impressed by him whenever she'd meet him at company events. She'd light up when he'd talk to her, asking about his work, his achievements, laughing at his jokes a little too hard. I noticed it, but I figured she was just being polite. Maybe I was being naive, or maybe I just didn't want to see what was right in front of me. The fights at home got worse. She'd compare me to other husbands, other men she knew who were making moves and taking risks. I started staying later at work, partly to avoid the tension and partly because I thought maybe she was right. Maybe I needed to push harder. The irony wasn't lost on me that the person she kept comparing me to was my boss. 3 months ago, I left work early because I had a splitting headache. I'd been fighting off a cold all week, and by 3 p.m., I felt like my head was going to explode. I figured I'd go home, take some medicine, and maybe get a nap before she got back from her book club meeting that wasn't supposed to end until 6. I walked into my house through the garage, like I always do, kicked off my shoes in the mudroom, and headed upstairs to grab some aspirin from our bathroom. That's when I heard it, voices coming from our bedroom. At first, I thought maybe she was on a phone call, but then I heard a man's voice, and my stomach dropped. I stood there in the hallway, frozen, listening to sounds that no spouse should ever have to hear coming from their own bedroom. My hands started shaking, and I felt like I might throw up. Part of me wanted to kick down the door and scream, but something else took over, this weird, cold calm that I'd never felt before. Instead of confronting them, I quietly went back downstairs and sat in my car in the garage. I waited about 20 minutes until I heard a car start in our driveway. I recognized the engine sound. It was his car. I'd heard it enough times in the company parking lot. When I finally went back inside, she was in the shower. I could hear her humming, actually humming, like she didn't have a care in the world. I sat on our couch, staring at the wall, trying to process what had just happened. When she came downstairs in her robe, hair wet, she seemed surprised to see me. She asked what I was doing home so early, and I told her about the headache. She made some comment about how I probably just needed to toughen up, that everyone gets headaches. Then she started talking about her book club meeting, describing conversations that I now knew never happened. She looked me right in the eye and lied so smoothly that I almost wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. That night, I lay in bed next to her, staring at the ceiling while she slept peacefully beside me. I kept thinking about all the little things that suddenly made sense. The new lingerie I'd found in her drawer that she said was for me, but never wore. The way she'd started working out more and caring about her appearance in ways she hadn't in years. The phone calls she'd take in other rooms. The random afternoon errands that seemed to take longer and longer. I didn't sleep at all that night. By morning, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to blow up, wasn't going to have some dramatic confrontation. Instead, I was going to be smart about this. If she thought I wasn't ambitious enough, wasn't strategic enough, I was about to prove her wrong. Update 1. The next few weeks were the strangest of my life. I went to work every day, sitting in meetings with him, making small talk, acting like nothing had changed. Meanwhile, at home, she kept up her routine of complaints about my lack of ambition, her book club meetings, her general dissatisfaction with our life together. But I was paying attention to everything now. I started noticing patterns in his behavior at work, how he'd take certain calls privately, how he'd sometimes leave early on the same day she had her meetings, how he'd seem distracted during our team sessions. I also started noticing things about the business that I'd been too trusting to question before. There were transactions that didn't quite make sense, client relationships that seemed unusually favorable, decisions that benefited certain accounts in ways that raised my eyebrows. I'd always assumed everything was above board because, well, why wouldn't it be? But now I was looking at everything with fresh eyes. I started documenting things. Not just the personal stuff, though I did take photos of receipts I found in his jacket pocket when he'd leave it draped over his chair, credit card statements that somehow ended up in our shared printer tray, hotel confirmations that appeared in his email previews when he'd step away from his computer. But I was also documenting the business irregularities. There was this one client account that kept getting preferential treatment on trades. The timing was always just a little too perfect, like someone had inside information. And there were email chains where he'd make suggestions that seemed to violate several company policies about disclosure and conflict of interest. At home, things got even weirder. She started being nicer to me, which somehow felt worse than the criticism. She'd make my favorite dinner, ask about my day with what seemed like genuine interest, even initiate physical intimacy for the first time in months. I realized she was probably feeling guilty, or maybe trying to throw me off the scent. Either way, it made my skin crawl. One evening, she was in the shower, and her phone buzzed with a text. I glanced at it automatically, just a reflex, and saw his name. The preview showed just enough. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. The usual place. I felt that same cold calm wash over me again. I went to our home office and started going through old bank statements, looking for charges at hotels or restaurants on days when she'd supposedly been at book club or running errands. Sure enough, there were charges at a boutique hotel downtown on 3 different afternoons over the past month. The same hotel where I'd seen those confirmation emails in his account. That weekend, she said she was going shopping with her sister. I knew her sister was out of town because I'd seen her post photos from a conference in another state on social media. So I followed her. I felt like a crazy person, but I had to know for sure. She went straight to that hotel. I waited in the parking lot for 2 hours until they both came out together. He kissed her goodbye right there in broad daylight, like they were a normal couple. The casualness of it hit me harder than anything else. This wasn't some moment of weakness or mistake. This was a full-blown relationship. That's when I started making my real plans. Update 2. I spent the next 3 weeks building my case, and I had help from an unexpected source. There was this financial journalist who'd been poking around our industry, writing articles about insider trading and regulatory violations. I'd read her work before and respected her thorough approach to investigative reporting. I created an anonymous email account and reached out to her, saying I had information about potential violations at a mid-sized financial firm. I didn't mention names at first, just shared some of the suspicious trading patterns I documented. She was interested but cautious, asking for more concrete evidence. Meanwhile, I was gathering everything I could. I started staying late at the office, not to impress anyone, but to access files and systems when the building was mostly empty. I found email chains between him and certain clients that pretty clearly showed information sharing that violated SEC regulations. There were also personal emails mixed in with business ones, messages to her, messages to other women, expense reports for dinners and hotel stays that were being billed to client accounts. The hardest part was acting normal. Every day, I'd sit in his office for our team meetings, watch him joke around with colleagues, see him make decisions that affected people's careers and livelihoods, all while knowing what kind of person he really was. He'd sometimes make comments about marriage, about loyalty, about the importance of trust in business relationships. I'd nod and smile while mentally adding each comment to the list of reasons he deserved what was coming. At home, she was getting more comfortable with her lies. She'd come back from her errands with shopping bags from stores she hadn't actually visited, stories about conversations with friends who I knew she hadn't seen. One night, she even had the nerve to complain that I'd been distant lately, that I wasn't paying enough attention to our relationship. She said maybe we should take a vacation together, reconnect, work on our communication. I almost laughed. The breakthrough came when I found a personal laptop he sometimes brought to work. He'd left it open in the conference room after a client meeting, and I had about 10 minutes alone with it while he was on a call. I found folders full of personal photos and documents, including detailed financial records that showed money being moved in ways that definitely weren't legal. But the real gold mine was a folder of screenshots from text conversations with various women, including my wife. Reading their messages was like getting punched in the stomach over and over. They talked about me like I was some pathetic obstacle, joked about my lack of ambition, made plans for their future together. In one message, she actually said she was working on getting me to agree to a divorce, that she just needed a few more months to set things up financially. That night, I sent everything to the journalist. Bank records, email chains, trading documents, regulatory violations, expense report fraud, the whole package. I also prepared a separate complaint for HR, focusing on the workplace violations and the misuse of company resources for personal affairs. But I didn't send the HR complaint right away. I had one more thing to do first. Update 3. The article came out on a Tuesday morning. The journalist had been thorough. She'd verified everything, found additional sources, and built a case that was absolutely damning. The headline was something like, "Local Financial Executive Under Investigation for Trading Violations and Company Fraud." She didn't name him directly in the headline, but anyone in our industry would know exactly who she was talking about within the first paragraph. I was in the break room getting coffee when I heard people talking about it. Within an hour, everyone in the office had read it. By lunch, there were lawyers in the building. By 3 p.m., he was being escorted out with a security guard while carrying a cardboard box. I played it perfectly, acted shocked, concerned, disappointed. I made all the right comments about how you never really know someone, how betrayed we all felt, how this would affect team morale. Inside, I felt like I was going to explode with satisfaction. But the best part was still coming. That evening, I got home before she did. I was sitting in the living room when she walked in, and I could tell immediately that she knew something was wrong. She'd probably been trying to call him all day. She asked if I'd heard about what happened at my work, and I told her the whole story, about the investigation, the article, how shocked everyone was. She tried to act surprised and concerned, but I could see the panic in her eyes. She kept checking her phone, probably hoping for some message from him explaining what was going on. Finally, she said she had a headache and went upstairs to bed early. I waited until I heard her shower running. Then I went to the kitchen and poured myself a drink. For the first time in months, I felt like I could actually relax. The next morning, she was different. Quiet, distracted, jumpy every time her phone made a sound. She barely touched her breakfast and kept staring off into space. I asked if she was feeling okay, and she said she was just worried about me, about how this scandal at work might affect my job security. That afternoon, I got a call from our head of HR. They wanted to meet with me about potentially taking on additional responsibilities while they restructured the department. When I walked into that meeting, I already knew what they were going to offer me. His job, his office, his salary, his position. They said they'd been impressed with my work, my stability, my integrity. They felt like I represented the kind of leadership the company needed moving forward. They asked if I'd be interested in stepping into an interim role that would likely become permanent after a review period. I accepted immediately. Final update. Walking into his office for the first time as its new occupant was surreal. Everything was exactly the same. The same furniture, the same view, even some of his personal items that security had missed. But it felt completely different because now it was mine. The first few days were crazy busy. I had to learn new systems, meet with clients who were nervous about the transition, reassure staff members who were worried about their job security. But I loved every minute of it. For the first time in years, I felt truly energized by my work. At home, things were falling apart quickly. She'd obviously been unable to reach him. His personal phone was probably confiscated as evidence, and he certainly wasn't taking social calls. She started making excuses to leave the house, probably hoping to run into him somewhere or figure out what was happening. She'd come back frustrated and increasingly desperate. One evening, about 2 weeks after everything went down, she finally cracked. She started crying and said she needed to tell me something important. She said she'd been unhappy in our marriage, that she'd made some mistakes, that she thought maybe we should consider separation. I listened to her whole speech about how we'd grown apart, how we wanted different things, how maybe it would be better for both of us to start fresh. She never admitted to the affair directly, but she was clearly trying to control the narrative, to make it seem like this was a mutual decision based on incompatibility rather than betrayal. When she finished talking, I just nodded and said that if that's what she wanted, we could discuss the logistics. She seemed relieved that I wasn't going to fight her on it. She probably thought she was getting away with everything. But I had one more surprise. The previous week, I'd been having lunch with some colleagues at a restaurant downtown when I saw a familiar face at the bar. It was his ex-wife. I recognized her from company events. She was always poised, elegant, but I'd heard through office gossip that their divorce had been finalized recently. I didn't approach her that day, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. A few days later, I looked her up on social media and sent her a message. I said I was sorry about what she'd been going through, that I'd recently learned some things about her ex-husband that had shocked me, and that if she ever wanted to talk to someone who understood what it was like to be betrayed by someone you trusted, I was available. She responded almost immediately. We started exchanging messages, then phone calls, then we met for coffee. She told me about the years of lies, the other women, the financial manipulation, the way he'd made her feel crazy for suspecting things that turned out to be true. Her story was so similar to mine that it was almost eerie. But talking to her felt different than talking to anyone else. She understood the anger, the humiliation, the way betrayal changes how you see everything. She also understood the satisfaction of watching someone who hurt you face consequences for their actions. We had this shared experience that created an instant connection. We started spending more time together. Just as friends at first, both of us processing our respective situations. But there was definitely something else developing beneath the surface. Last week, my wife came home and said she'd found an apartment and would be moving out at the end of the month. She seemed happy, probably thinking she was about to start some new life with her former boss once things settled down. She had no idea that he was facing federal charges and would likely be going to prison. I told her that sounded like a good plan and that I hoped she'd be happy. Then I mentioned that I'd been seeing someone. Casually, nothing serious yet, but someone who really understood what I'd been going through. She asked who it was, and I told her it was his ex-wife. The look on her face was worth everything I'd been through. Shock, rage, disbelief, and then this dawning realization that her entire plan had backfired spectacularly. She started screaming about how I was being vindictive, how I was trying to hurt her, how this was all some elaborate revenge plot. I stayed calm and told her that it wasn't revenge. It was just two people who'd been through similar experiences finding comfort in each other. I said that if she thought I was being vindictive, maybe she should consider how her actions over the past months had led to this situation. She stormed out and hasn't been back since. She's staying with her sister while she waits for her apartment to be ready. We've only communicated through text about logistics, who's taking what furniture, how to handle the joint accounts, when she'll get the rest of her things. Yesterday, I got a promotion letter making my interim position permanent, along with a significant salary increase. Last night, I had dinner with someone who makes me laugh, who appreciates my ambition and drive, who sees my success as something to celebrate rather than something to criticize. 6 months ago, my wife told me I wasn't hungry enough for success. She said I was too comfortable, too willing to accept mediocrity. She was sleeping with my boss, planning to leave me, and treating me like I was some kind of failure. Now I have his job, his salary, his office, and I'm dating his ex-wife. She's facing a divorce where she'll get far less than she expected because of her infidelity, and her affair partner is facing federal charges. I never thought I was the revenge type, but it turns out I'm much more strategic than anyone gave me credit for. Sometimes the best way to prove someone wrong about your ambition is to show them exactly how far you're willing to go when they push you too hard.